John Phelps with you today on this November 14th, 2023 at approximately 3 o'clock. Coming to you live and direct from Newmanstown, Pennsylvania with my dear brother George Widger joining me today as we have our generally weekly broadcast. I've been gone for the last couple of weeks. So, Brother George, welcome to the broadcast on this November 14th, 2023.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
It's always my pleasure, George. You always teach me something. So what have we for the listeners today?
Well, okay, my scripture verse is 1 Peter 5, verses 1 to 3. 1 Peter 5, verses 1 to 3. The elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness of the suffering of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, i.e. money, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but examples of flock. I'll read verses 2 and 3 again. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but an example of the flock. Okay, notice that Simon Peter wrote this passage, and as we've discussed before, according to the Catholic Church, he was the first pope. Look at Matthew 16, verses 18 through 19. Oh, okay, I won't relitigate that. If Simon Peter were the first pope, somebody forgot to tell him that, because he says specifically we're not elders, pastors, are not supposed to lord over the flock, i.e. boss people around.
Amen, Brother George. That's right.
So, and moreover, he said we're supposed to be examples, not dressed in white, not basically treated as royalty, where generally speaking, people who go to the Vatican to go see the Pope had to dress all in black. Women, usually the wives of presidents or prime ministers or whoever is going over there, had to dress as if they're going to a funeral. It's a sign of subordination. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Catholic or an atheist or whatever, you always had to show him submission.
That's right.
So, case in point, going back to at least 1959, every U.S. president has had at least one papal audience. There were others before that, but this has been going on continuously since 1959 with Dwight Eisenhower. Now, the late Queen Elizabeth II, who was the titular head of the Church of England, whenever she got to see the Pope, whoever it was, at the various times, she always wore black. Now, she's supposed to be the leader, or the nominal leader of a separate religion. Why was she dressed in black?
And a Protestant religion at that, protesting the claims of the Pope. Yep. Why is she even there?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. Maybe she was a tourist. She went, hey, I hear they have some nice artwork at St. Peter Basilica.
Yeah. Now, the Jesuits have run England or Great Britain since no later than King George III, and which includes the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church. And so they demonstrate that by telling their subordinate to go see their master, the Pope of Rome.
Mm-hmm. So
they do.
Well, it's not just your so-called high church Protestants, such as Church of England or the Anglican Church. Rick Warren has had at least one papal audience. He used to pastor a Saddleback Church in Southern California, and he's supposed to be a Southern Baptist.
Well, George, what did you always say about the Southern Baptist? Well, what does that stand for? SB, what is it? Southern Baptist Convention, or SB. What's that stand for, George?
Slowly becoming Catholic.
Slowly becoming Catholic. That's exactly correct.
Oh, okay. And
it's got 1,000 Freemasons in the denomination. 1,000 Scottish Rite Freemasons. That's right.
1,000? Well, you're
Pardon
being.
me, I think it was 1 million. Was it 1 million?
Well.
Yeah, it was 1 million. 1 million Scottish Rite Freemasons in the Southern Baptist Convention, including Billy Graham. So, yeah. In other words, the Scottish Rite is totally written by the Jesuits, as proven by many people. And so the Scottish Rite are their henchmen at the top to do their bidding. Yep.
Well, okay. I'm sorry for constantly throwing out these obscure cultural references to you from decades ago, but do you remember Rod Stewart? He was popular back in the 70s with he did, if you was it
he was a pervert solo singer, right?
Well, among other things, he did If You Think I'm Sexy, or Maggie May, or Maggie was a decent singer, but he's supposed to be Church of Scotland, which is I guess what they officially call the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. And he's had at least one papal audience.
Well, whoever has a papal audience is a servant of the Pope, and he would not be invited to go there if he wasn't.
Yes, indeed.
Anybody at a papal audience is invited there. You just don't turn up and get an audience with the Pope.
And of course, that requires minimum months of planning, if not years.
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to see the Vicar of Christ now. You better be all ready to roll.
Okay, and you had better be dressed in black, and so, and it doesn't matter what your religious affiliation, even if you don't profess to be any form of Christian, you have to wear black. You wear a black suit if you're a man, or black dress if you're a woman. And if you're transgender, I'm not sure. I guess it depends on what day it is. But
when the Muslim leaders go, they're wearing black.
Orthodox
leaders, they're wearing black. Yeah. Jewish leaders, they're wearing black.
Oh, okay. Did you? I'm sorry. We weren't talking about Goldmeyer, were we?
Sure. Goldmeyer wanted to have the Pope beatified, Pius XII. Well, Pius XII helped to oversee the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust. So Goldmeyer was busy serving the papacy and covering up for the crimes of Jesuit-directed Pius XII.
Well, hey, nobody's perfect. But anyhow, and of course, wasn't she prime minister? I should know this, but wasn't she prime minister during? Okay, what was it? 67 was the 6-Day War, and 73 was the Yom Kippur.
Yep.
Okay, so Golda Meir was a prime minister in 73, and that took place roughly 50 years ago. As a matter of fact, they just came out with a movie about her. With her lady, Helen Mirren, were who, by the way, is the Dame of Malta. I realize that's purely coincidental. But
who is the Dame of Malta, George?
Helen Mirren. She's a lady of St. John of Jerusalem.
Yes.
I'm sorry, a Dame of St. John of Jerusalem.
A Dame of Malta. Yes. And what is she famous for, George?
Oh, I guess she's an actress, but she just came out with a movie called Golda. The Golda Meir story. I've not seen it.
I see. Well, Barry Chamish has a lot to write about her, so if the listeners want to know more about her, get the works of Barry Chamish.
Okay. So anyhow, I had something in my docket, in my folder. It's been there for a couple of months, and so I said I would finally get to it. Are you familiar with the late Thomas Aloysius Bolan? Bolan.
Tom Bolan. Yeah, he was affiliated with Roy Cohen, I believe.
Yes, among other things. So just for clarity, a reference, he was born on the 30th of May, 1920. in Lynn, Massachusetts, and died on May the 12th, 2017. So 7 years ago. He went to Bishop Laughlin High School in Lynn, Massachusetts, and he got his undergrad and law degree from St. John's College in New York City. Mm-hmm. I'm just going from memory here. I have too many folders opened up. So this is according to his obituary from the National Review in May of.
And the National Review is another Catholic magazine run by the Knights of Malta, founded by Knight of Malta, William F. Buckley. Go ahead.
Well, Tom Bullen also was one of the co-founders of the National Review.
Oh, really?
So it was founded, this is according to the National Review's obituary for Tom Bullen. It was found, the magazine, both Bullen and Bill Buckley co-founded the National Review, as you said. And people know about Buckley, but virtually nobody knows about Tom Bullen. Now, it was founded at the behest of Cardinal Spellman.
Francis Cardinal Spellman, the chief one behind the Kennedy assassination.
Yes, among other things. Now, as it just so happens, Spellman, this is according to National Review in his obituary of Tom Bullen. It was Spellman who recommended that the Bullen law firm hire Cohn.
Hire what now, George?
Roy Cohn.
Oh, Roy Cohn, the little Jewish Knight of Malta in New York City, who had the deadest set of eyes I've ever seen. What a dead set of eyes he had.
Okay, so also according to his obituary from the National Review, he was a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, Tom Bullen.
Tom Bullen, wow. So he is was a very powerful man. Knight of Malta, Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, which generally it's only cardinals and others in the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, men of real power. And like Rupert Murdoch, that's also called the Equestrian Order. The Knights of the Holy Sepulchre are the Equestrians, and they're higher than the Knights of Malta.
Well, the Bullen law firm had a number of prominent clients, including John Gotti, the Trump family. Yes, the Trump family, Donald Trump and so forth. The New York Yankees, the Catholic Archdiocese. I say specifically New York Yankees as well, specifically George Steinbrenner.
George Steinbrenner. Mm-hmm. I think he was another knight. That for me. The Jesuits ran the New York Yankees to act as a diversion of attention away from what was happening in Washington.
Yes, indeed. Now, as I said, Bullen represented the Trump family. So he knew Donald Trump back in the 1960s. He knew his father, Fred Trump. And speaking of Trumps, there was a prominent Trump who died yesterday, Mary Ann Trump, the older sister of Donald Trump. She was born on the 5th of April, 1937. Now, I have her biography here. She was a federal judge from 1983 to 1999. She wrote, where was she? She was appointed by Ronald Reagan. So from 1983 to 1989, she was a federal judge. And I'm sorry, I should have her profile here. So in 1999, Bill Clinton named her to be her judge on the Third Court of Appeals.
Well, that's great. And so now we have more women judges and women in politics. Let's just give the whole country over to the women, and we men can stay home and pray for them when they go fight the enemies. And we'll stay home and we'll take care of the children. How about
that? Well, okay, I can address that in just a moment. So this is her background. So she, as I said, she was on the Third Court of Appeals from 2011 to 2019.
Third Circuit Court of Appeals, that's right.
Well, I'm sorry, from 1999 to 2011. Now, I guess she retired in 2011. Well, she grew up Presbyterian, but she converted over to, this is Mary Ann Trump, Donald's older sister. She converted over to Catholicism after her marriage to John Barry. And
Catholic, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, in 2016, Mary Ann Trump donated $4 million to Fairfield University in Connecticut.
And what kind of university is that, George? Fairfield University.
Jesuits.
Thank you. So we have the Trumps giving $4 million to the Jesuits back in what, 2000, when?
16.
2016. So more of the Jesuit connection to Trump, as I'm telling these deceived white people. Biden and Trump work together, both run by the Jesuits, to create the new right. But go ahead.
Okay. So, as I said, she was a convert to Catholicism. Well, in 2004, Mary Ann Barry received the Sandra Day O'Connor Prize from Seton Hall University, which is an award bestowed to prominent female lawyers and judges. Now, Seton Hall is...
Exalt all the women. Exalt the women and make them judges and presidents and kings, and may the eternal feminine mystique rule over all of us, because they're so superior to us men. Go ahead, George.
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't going to mention this, but the other day I rewatched the 1955 film, To Hell and Back, the Audie Murphy story. Now, granted, it was Hollywoodized. And you have seen this picture before?
Oh, yeah, I did see it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for those who, I know we've talked about Audie Murphy before, and for the younger generation, they may not be familiar with him. He lived, I believe, from 1924-25. His birthday was June the 20th, and he was killed in a plane crash, suspiciously, on May the 24th, 1971. And as I said, why the plane crash? I'm not going to broach that. But so he received something like over 20 different awards, including from France, because of all of his military prowess. He was, I think, in 3rd Division, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure somebody's going to correct me on that. But he was in North Africa, Sicily, the Italian mainland, and southern France. He was wounded at least twice, and he was on the front cover of Life magazine, and he was a national hero.
Henry Luce, Life magazine. Knight of Malta, Henry Robinson Luce, running Life magazine. Yep. And a Kennedy assassin also. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So Murphy was basically known as a B-rate Western actor because almost all of his films were Westerns. Now, he did do a couple of non-Westerns. The aforementioned 1955, not Paths of Glory, To Hell and Back, and the 1951, The Red Badge of Courage. Besides that, I believe all of his other films were Westerns. Okay, so in the 1955 film, which was released on September the 27th, 1955, it talks about Audie Murphy's life in the Army and his life in rural Texas, growing up on a farm during the Great Depression. Okay, so why do I bring this up? Well, I think they obviously should remake this movie because it was obviously, it was definitely sexist and misogynistic because almost all the characters in the movie were men, were white men.
Oh, I bet most of them are all white men too. That's really,
yes. Now,
that's racist and sexist. There we go.
Okay, you did have a few females. You had a nurse. You had Audie Murphy's mom before she, they had his sick and dying mom. They have some scenes with Audie Murphy's sisters who are always wearing dresses. And he has some scenes of some Italian girls. And when he meets an Italian girl who speaks English, the first thing she does is offer to make him dinner. So she obviously was not a feminist. So they definitely need, and there was not one black person in the movie.
Oh, what a sin. Oh, more racism. Can't have a movie without blacks in it. I had a guy that made movies in Hollywood. I said, why is it that you guys make a movie, you got to have all the movies have some blacks in it. Aren't there any portrait pieces you guys do where there's just white people? Oh no, we can't do that. And he worked for Hollywood. And he told me that.
Okay, well, I mean, the whole idea was satanic. I mean, I know we talked about World War II, and I'm not going to, relitigate that. But you had white people fighting against other whites. You had Americans fighting against the Germans.
That's right.
And however,
white men killing white men. What a disgrace.
Okay, so they obviously should have had somebody like Scarlett Johansson in the movie. I realized she wasn't alive at the time, but they should have had somebody like her in the movie who basically could beat up all these Germans.
Yeah, get those Amazons in there and they can beat up all those white men. Here we go. More nonsense and fiction out of Hollywood.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, but there's also an interesting scene in the beginning of the movie where he talks about where Audie Murphy arrives in North Africa. And I guess his superior officer invites him into a tent and said, "Hey, Murphy, we looked at your profile and we think we want to transfer you to a non-combat unit, like as a cook or truck driver or something, because we don't think you're cut out to be a soldier. You spend almost your time, when you're in basic training, you spend almost your time in the infirmary." And he said, "Well, sir, that was because I got vaccinated. I'd never had a shot before." So
that's because they pumped me up with monkey pus and snake venom, sir. And I really didn't do well under that monkey pus and snake venom. We were saying that back, George Gordon was saying that back in the 1970s. Didn't take Dr. Artist to come out with this as new. They were giving snake venom back then, but go ahead.
So I just want to, so Audie Murphy joined the Army when he was 16 years old. So how was he able to survive for 16 years without getting a single?
Because he was out in the fields of Texas.
Well, don't you know how much better his life would have been if they didn't have him for measles back then, but for smallpox or whatever it is they had, because he could have died if he had.
Yeah. The religion of the Jesuits medical profession says you got to have, so line up, shut your mouth, and just take it. I remember this when I was in the Air Force, and they had these guns, and they had mostly black dudes doing it because they like doing it to the white boys. So they had these shotguns that they put it against your arm, and it shot in the vaccine. And there were 4 guys that got deathly ill. They had to take them over to Lackland Hospital, which is the big military Air Force hospital in the area in San Antonio. And they almost died from there.
Well, anyhow, so I'm glad that Audie Murphy got to join the Army. So he finally got his shots belatedly. Because not only did he spend several weeks in the infirmary, he almost spent, he had to sail over, I guess, which was how they did it back. You didn't fly over from America to Europe, to England. You sailed over, and that was actually the case until the 1950s. And I have a quick little anecdote for that.
Let me give you an anecdote, George. I had a history teacher in 8th grade named Mr. Kaiser at what was it, Pinole Junior High. That's a middle school out here in Pennsylvania. We call it junior high in California. And Mr. Kaiser told us about his trip overseas in the Army during World War II. And when the ship would go up, all the vomit that everybody was vomiting in these big, in these huge streams of the vomit would run down the ship, and it would be like 3 feet thick at the end, and then the ship would go down, and the vomit would run the other direction. He said it was the most horrible, disgusting experience that he ever had, and I never forget him telling me that. Mm-hmm. That was also for the urinal and the vomiting, so that's what was together there.
Okay, so my dad joined the U.S. Air Force in 1950. Now, granted, this is 5 years after the war, but you're talking Korean War era. And he said they sent the airmen over basically on World War II era vessels because the practice of flying troops over just hadn't taken off yet. And almost everybody on his transport got sick. They spent almost the entire time throwing up because
Yeah.
They're going
The waves are 25 feet high.
Yes.
There's ships going up 25 feet and all that stuff's running down and down again. Yeah.
So, gee, if I didn't know any better, I don't have any. I'm not looking at this. It is almost done on purpose. It's like a form of torture.
Yep.
Now, my dad, as you didn't throw up, not because he has such a strong constitution. It's just that for some reason he got nervous about going aboard a ship, so he didn't eat for something like 24 hours beforehand. And as a matter of fact, he didn't eat the entire time he was on a ship. So he had water. So he lost a bunch of weight on the journey over to England because he didn't eat anything.
Yep.
And not because he, fasting. It's that. That reminds. Whether you're talking, World War II, Korea, it seems that the people who are the people who are running it want to inflict as much damage and pain as possible on the service members, the sailors.
Of course, because they're a bunch of heretics and liberals. They're heretic Protestants and Baptists and liberal Roman Catholics. And so you combine them too, and they're condemned by the Council of Trent. What can we do? Well, we'll just pack them in there as rats, and they can urinate and defecate all in the same thing. And we're going up. Isn't that funny? Wonder how many will die. Ceaseless.
Well, you want to talk about that era. Yeah, I was talking to somebody recently about this who was a tanker. He was into tanks when he was in the Army. Has the United States ever designed a decent tank?
Well, we're told all about the Yankee Sherman tank and what a great tank that was. But the German Panzer was much better. And the Soviet tank was better than the American Sherman tank. But the Soviet tank all that technology was given to them by the military government in Washington, because that's not their invention. Yep.
Well, I mean, there was two major vehicles, types of tanks the United States used during World War II: the aforementioned Sherman, named after William Tecumseh Sherman, and the Grant tank. Okay.
The Grant tank. Never heard of that one, George. Can you tell us something about it?
Well, it wasn't very popular. I mean, I've not researched it, but it just wasn't. It was even worse than the Sherman. It had even less armor, and head-to-head combat. It doesn't matter whether you're about the Grant or the Sherman. If they're one either against excuse me, Tiger 1 or Tiger 2, it would be literally blown away.
Yeah. So that's, again, they gave our troops inferior equipment. Although Patton said the M1 was the best rifle that had ever been invented, but they gave our troops inferior equipment and to further weaken them in the war effort. So that more would be killed, but it was all choreographed that the Americans, the French, and the British would win, and the Russians.
Okay, so one of the main reasons why the United States won was commonly called World War II, or as you like to say, the final phase of the Second 30 Years' War, is because our factories massively outproduced the Germans. They're just basically
everyone armed everyone.
Okay,
they basically British had armed the Russian, Soviets. Yeah.
Okay, so the tanks and other pieces of equipment were just basically slapped together. There's virtually no craftsmanship, no precision involved. Mm-hmm. Unlike, say, the
George, it's just like the war in Afghanistan. They gave the American troops all these jeeps and other things with no armor. And finally, they complained, you haven't given us any armor on our vehicles. Imagine that. Yep. Military government sending out our soldiers to get killed for nothing.
But there again, it almost seems as if this was done on purpose. I mean, they actually mentioned this in the movie Patton. You had what's his name? Carl Malden, who played Bradley. He said, "You know what they call our troops call our tanks, the Shermans? Purple Heart boxes."
Purple Heart boxes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't a joke.
Yep. No, it was to kill the best of white American manhood, to further reduce the United States to a weakened nation that would be more easily conquered in the future coming years.
Okay, speaking of which, now I know we're talking about Germany, and I know, well, briefly, I know in recent broadcasts we talk about the sinking of several German vessels in 1945 between January and April of that year, basically the end of the war. The first one we talked about was on January 30th, 1945, was the Gustav. Almost 10,000 people were sunk when that went down, almost all of whom were women, children, wounded soldiers. But,
and the Jesuits celebrated over that one.
Well, yes.
They were all heretics.
Okay, so
those Lutherans, yeah.
Okay, so
Ad majorem de gloriam, for the greater glory of God.
Okay,
accursed
so
be all heretics, accursed, accursed. Council of Trent. Go ahead, George.
Okay, I know we've discussed it before, and I know this may sound somewhat tiresome, but I need to address a couple of points. So you talk about the Gustav, you're talking about the von Steuben on November the 10th, 1945, and the Goya. About 5,000 people went down. That took place on April the 16th, 1945. So between these three vessels, you're talking at least 20,000 people who were killed. There again, almost all of whom were women and children, disabled, elderly, and of course...
And Protestants. They were Protestants primarily.
Well, yes. So there are probably at least 10 different German vessels that were sunk in this time period. So the losses actually could have been tens of thousands. There again, all the captains were given specific instructions. One, not to take evasive maneuvers. Two, they had no escorts. Three, they had no protection whatsoever. They had no sonar, they had no depth charges, they had no armor plating, no deck guns. So,
because it was a sacrifice. It was a water sacrifice. They were drowning them like rats. Maybe it was a fire sacrifice if the ships caught on fire and then burned them all up while it went down. But it was an offering unto the Pope that I'm sure was well received.
Okay, so now we're talking basically the first half of 1945, but the nightmare and killing didn't end there. Last week, somebody sent me a video as a reenactment of a young woman named Elsie, who in 1946, she was about 30 years old, so she would have been born around about 1916. She was a young widow with a couple of children, a son and a daughter. Her husband, Walter, was killed at Stalingrad like a couple years earlier. So she and her family showed up in Dresden, Germany in August 1946. So roughly a year and a half after the bombing.
So they showed up in the decimated, historically Protestant, beautiful city of Dresden, having been firebombed by the American Air Force and the British Air Force, pursuant to the Council of Trent.
Correct. So she showed up, she walked roughly, I'm not sure, a couple hundred miles from Silesia, which had been part of Germany. So there's like, okay, this could take hours to explain, but there are millions of Germans scattered all over Europe, in Poland, what is now Czechoslovakia, Czechia.
So Silesia is now in Poland. Yeah.
Okay, yes. And there are other Germans, actually ethnic Germans, in Ukraine and Russia. So some of them were like 1,000 miles away from their native Germany. And how they ended up there is a long, convoluted story. So they're told that they had to go back to Germany. So this young woman, Elsa, as I said, who was widowed, had to walk probably a couple hundred miles, and only about half of her family made it. Her parents died, her sister died, and so she was fortunate in that she got a job removing rubble. And the rubble removal was done almost exclusively by women, because you may be wondering why. Well, there weren't any men around because almost all of them had been killed, captured, wounded, or were missing.
Yep.
And so they have literally nobody to protect them or to look after them. And so the job of rubble removal was basically tasked to the women, of which there was something like 50,000 or so. So they had to remove all the millions of tons and tons of debris in Dresden. And it took them something like 12 years to do the job. It wasn't complete until something like 1957. And you may be wondering, why do they do it by hand? Because they obviously had heavy equipment. They had tractors, bulldozers, cranes, all that sort of equipment. Well, I don't know. I guess they're probably told.
It was like working them to death. A great Jesuit design, work them to death, like they did in the concentration camps, like the Nazi concentration camps, and like they did in Stalin's Gulag, working them to death.
Okay, so
they're doing in America now. They're working us to death. Cutting back the food supply. Got to work 2 jobs, working Americans to death. But they think they're free, and they just can't figure it out. But go ahead, George.
Okay, so if you want to know what communism looked like, you can just simply look at the people who are charged with rebuilding Dresden. It wasn't just Dresden. You're talking dozens of other German cities like Dusseldorf and Heidelberg and places like that. So they're all given ration books, and they had 5 levels. Level 1 was starvation, like you entitled to something like 1,000 calories a day, and if you were a worker, you got something like 2,000 a day. Now, which is still starvation, if you're lifting boulders and things like that and rocks. So she is fortunate in that she got the highest ration book possible. So you basically had to beg from the government to give you something. Oh, please give us something to eat. Now, what a number of Germans did is they resorted to the black market, which is illegal. So anything was for sale: shoelaces, wedding rings, watches, buttons from shirts or from jackets. Yes, any type of clothing items. They're just simply, something that became fairly common in Germany is to wear shirts or jackets with mismatched buttons. They didn't care. Everything had to be repurposed. Old uniforms were repurposed into civilian clothing. So say what you will about the Germans, but they tend to be very ingenious and industrious. But as I said, you were able to supplement things on the fly.
And I'll tell you something else. The women were busy there prostituting. They were accepting chocolate candy in exchange for sex. I have a friend who's died. His name was Harry Boyer. He knew the Lord, and he was in Patton's Third Army. And he sang a song that the German women used to sing, inviting the black soldiers to give him a black baby. Kind of little nigga, kind of little nigga, for a chocolate bar, I'll give you chocolate baby. 999999999. I'll never forget when he told me that. Finally, I asked him, I said, would you record this for me? He refused to record it. So that's what was happening. Lots of gang rape on the German women. And Harry Boyer told me one day, he said, General Patton called out his whole army there in formation one day, and he told them to stop fornicating with these German women. That's what General Patton said. And Harry said to me, oh, the troops, they didn't like that, especially the Italian Catholics and the other Catholics, because they just love that fornication. And Protestants, not so much. Baptists, if they're believers, no way. But I'm sure the Italian Catholics and the Irish Catholics really got mad at Patton about that. So he called them out, told them to stop fornicating with these German women. That was George Patton. There was no other general that did such a thing.
Well, and just talking, if I can address the whole idea of the black market, there's not much research on this because this was done underground. And so the evidence we have for this is largely anecdotal. So, however, engaging in the black market was a capital offense. They could shoot you, usually the Russians, could shoot you on the spot. So, and I've talked about this
Well,
before.
the Jesuits running the Russians, the Jesuits running the Soviets, loved to kill the Germans where they were in their occupation, because the Germans in the Eastern Bloc were primarily historic Lutherans, whereas the Germans in the western part of West Germany were primarily Roman Catholics. So that's why they gave the benevolent West Germany or benevolent American soldiers and others to West Germany, but the savage Russian Soviet soldiers, they just absolutely persecuted, raped, tortured, murdered the Germans in the East and kept East Germany down. That was punishment for the Protestant Reformation originating in East Germany, the Wittenberg.
Okay, so you had this situation where what people who are involved, who are arrested for black marketeering, something like a third of them died. They're either shot or they died in prison, and you had no niceties like the Hague Convention or the Geneva Convention or habeas corpus. As I said, they could shoot you on the spot, they could torture you on the spot, they could rape you on the spot.
That's good Jesuit morality. Yep.
And so
that is not Protestant policy. Protestants and Baptists do not do that. That is what Roman Catholics do under leaders that are also Catholics, busy serving the Jesuits. There is a great difference, and that needs to constantly be brought into before our faces. Go ahead, George.
I'm sorry, could you elaborate on that? I mean, I think I understand your point, but I just want to make sure the listeners understand your point.
Yeah, Protestant soldiers and Baptist soldiers don't rape women on the battlefield and when they're occupying. They don't do that. It's their policy not to do that. It's the policy of the Catholics to do that. That's what they do. That's when the Catholics came over here in the American Revolution. They rounded up the Protestants, drove them into the Protestant churches, and set them on fire. Protestant soldiers, Calvinistic soldiers, do not do that. They do not rape, they do not pillage, they do not plunder. And when Cromwell, when he invaded Scotland, he told those Scots, he said, "You will not have any robbery, rape, or murder by my soldiers, because I brought plenty of hemp, plenty of rope, and I'll hang every last one of them that does anything like that to you." Protestant soldiers and generals do not engage in that practice. And we always must remember that. It's the same thing with slavery. Protestants and Baptists are generally good to their slaves. They gave them equity. They obeyed Colossians chapter 4, but not the Roman Catholics. The Roman Catholics of Florida, the Roman Catholics of Louisiana worked their slaves to death, whereas the Protestants of Virginia and North and South Carolina and Georgia did not do that. So we always have to distinguish between how the Catholics acted and how the Protestants acted. The Protestants and the Baptists read the King James Bible. They handed out the King James Bible to the troops in World War II. I just got one from a lady. She donated it to the church library. But in Catholic armies, they don't do any such thing. They don't hand out the Bible, just like they don't hand out the Bible to the American troops anymore today, because our armies are now primarily Roman Catholic, run by the Roman Catholic Secretary of Defense, the black man who is a Roman Catholic himself.
Oh, was it Lloyd? Is his
Lloyd,
name?
yeah, he's a Roman Catholic, raised by his mother to be Catholic, yeah. So we have, yeah.
Okay, so just fast forward to 1960s and 70s, somewhat more recently, say in Vietnam, it was a similar situation there, where I want to choose my words carefully because I don't want to come across as being racist.
Yeah, you don't want to be accused of racism and sexist and bigotry like I'm accused of, even though none of it's true. But go ahead, George.
Oh, okay, so there's this the United States should never have been in Vietnam, but that's another subject altogether. But It's as if that many of the American soldiers there, now I'm not sure how prevalent this was with the French who were there before that, but it seems that for many of the American soldiers, they could do they thought they had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to the North Vietnamese, to the Viet Cong, or to whomever.
Right.
Well, or maybe that's not completely accurate. Maybe it was Catholics who thought that way.
Yeah, it was the Catholics who thought that way. Protestant Bible reading people don't do that. Baptist Bible reading people do not do that. It's the Catholics who do that.
Okay, so
they're not saved, they're not Christians, and they don't read the Bible. That's their history.
Oh, okay. So I mentioned my father. I mean, as I said, he was in the Air Force from 1950 to 1972, and he was in Vietnam from 67 to 68. And when he got in country, he was given a memo of a whole bunch of things that he was supposed to do and not do. One of which was they had a detailed list of all the items they were not supposed to throw away. If they had to get rid of them, they had somebody come around in special containers to remove them. So ballpoint pens, shaving cream cans, things like that, anything that was aerosolized, because the Viet Cong could use those and make them into bombs. Now this may sound completely immature.
Let's make this clear. The Viet Cong, who were they? They were the men in Vietnam who didn't want the foreign army of America there. So we're going to give them, instead of calling them patriotic Vietnamese fighting an invader into their country under the guise of stopping communism and preventing the domino effect, which was a total lie, we're going to kill these nationalists of Vietnam, some 5 million of them. And that was the purpose of the war, not to stop communism. But we're going to give them a name like a Viet Cong, you know.
Oh, okay. Yes, thank you for the clarification. And so they were, one of the things they said is, don't, I'll watch my language here. And they said, by the way, my dad was married and had 4 children at the time. And they said specifically, please don't have carnal knowledge with the women. You never know which one of them you might end up with a surprise. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, no, let's talk about that, because I know about that. I know that the American servicemen, they were getting venereal disease from these Vietnamese women, and they got something called black syphilis. And black syphilis is wherever you have contact with the vaginal area, your skin turns black. And if they had oral sex with these women, their lips, their throat turned black. Same way with regular sexual intercourse. Their penis turned black, shriveled, and ultimately fell off. That's called black syphilis, and I was told that by a guy who had been to Nam, and he came back, and he'd been addicted to Cambodian red. And he said, that's right, that happened many times. And when these guys would get that, they would put him on a Navy destroyer or a tin can out to sea, let him die, bury him at sea, and then send a letter back to their parents that he died in action. There was a place in Saigon where it was only for black men. Shows how racist they are and were then. And the place was called Seoul City. And I had 2 of my white friends that were in Vietnam. He says, yeah, Eric, place is called Seoul City, and there ain't no white men allowed there because all the Vietnamese horrors are just for black men. And they called it Seoul City, and if you were white, you were finished. We're never told about Seoul City, but that's a fact. So no, it was a horrible, demeaning, demoralizing war that created more racism and prejudice than you could dream, so they could bring it back and further participate in the Pope's uncivil rights movement.
Well, there again, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I think I sent you this video. It was a 1963 interview with Malcolm Little, aka Malcolm X. I forgot the platform, but it was a mainstream show where they're talking, where X, another black man, and the white commentator were talking about the civil rights movement. And X's policy was, well, I don't participate in it because I know it's a ruse. Now, X was talking in 1963, and he said, look at all the prominent black men of today. I'm 1963, 60 years ago. All They're entertainers. They're athletes.
That's
they're
right.
comedians.
He said they're entertainers. He said they're trumpet players, and he was talking about John Coltrane. They're all they are is entertainers. That's right. He was absolutely right.
So he said, "Well, who's prominent now? Well, Sammy Davis Jr., Dick Gregory, a few other, Willie Mays,
and they all have their white women. Yeah.
Well, okay." And he said, behind every prominent black leader in the so-called civil rights movement, you have a white man. Now, granted, maybe he wasn't being dishonest, but he said, oftentimes they're Jewish. He did say that, but he didn't mention anything about Spellman. Maybe he didn't know about Francis Cardinal Spellman.
That's true, because Francis Cardinal Spellman was made a member of the Urban League by the leading blacks of the day in New York City. That's right, because Spellman ran the Black Urban League.
Yep. Okay. So one of the things that Malcolm X said is they're doing, whoever is in charge. He didn't say the Vatican. He said that they want to re-enslave the black man, but they're being a little bit more intelligent about it because they want to create the illusion of freedom. Yes, they'll give us a few bucks for spending king, or for spending money, but rather than having us live in the plantation of Alabama, they want to put us in apartment complexes in Chicago or Detroit.
Absolutely right. And breed all this crime to justify more white outrage, to drive the whites into the new right and end of constitutional liberty. That's exactly right. We'll use the blacks to bring to power the new right. And that's exactly what the civil rights movement was about.
Okay, so you know how earlier we were talking about Thomas Aloysius Bullen. Well, he founded the so-called New York State chapter of the Conservative Party. And as I said, he co-founded with Bill Buckley the National Review at the behest of Spellman.
Yeah, Francis Cardinal Spellman was the American Pope. He was the most powerful man in this country from probably 1939 to 1967 when he died. You got to get the book, The American Pope, by, what was his name? John Sweeney, I believe.
Okay, so anyhow, getting to my point. So, we're talking about Audie Murphy, and I liked him growing up. I wasn't.
I did too. Yeah, he was a very mannerly Texan.
Well, you see, the thing is, I don't think he realized he was a dupe. He thought he was serving his country in World War II, and now, granted, he survived the meat grinder, and the Jesuits said, "Hey, you know what? Let's make him a star."
Yeah, let's make him a hero. And what a wonderful he did when he fought for America in World War II after Wall Street financed the Dawes Plan and created the German army and ultimately brought Hitler to power. I said that to my father once. I said, "Dad, do you realize that Wall Street brought Hitler to power and financed with the Dawes Plan?" He said, "Oh, J.C. Eric." He said, "What have you been reading?" He says, "We went over there to save the world from Hitler." I said, "Dad, you didn't save the world from Hitler. You were a sucker, just like I was a sucker in Germany for 3.5 years, ready to fight the Soviets. All a lie, all of it." Well, that's why he only talked to me for about 3 or 4 times in 20 years. Didn't want to hear that.
Okay, so anyhow, they decided to make. Okay, so he survived the meat grinder over in Europe and North Africa. So they decided to make him a national icon, a B-rate movie star. But the problem with Murphy is, this is just my opinion, I could be wrong, is he started speaking out against the war in Vietnam, and when he wasn't authorized to. And he said, "Hey."
Bad boy. He did that just like Malcolm X. Yep, go ahead.
And he sort of became more of a liability than an asset. His film career was winding down. He was basically made the same movie over and like Desperate Rise Again, and he was. I'm not sure how many movies he made, a couple of dozen. But they said, "You know what? We made him. We'll pull the plug on him."
That's right.
So
right.
That was it. And so, and he had. Now, Audie Murphy had his problem. He was addicted to pain pills. He's a heavy drinker. He's a notorious gambler. He was a notorious adulterer. But I think his conscience got to him. That's just simply my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I know I always admired him and I liked him, and he had a very gentleman demeanor about him, but he was tough. So I like that combination. But he was used, just like Patton was used, just like any of the historic white Protestants were used, deceived into fighting a war that had nothing to do with the safety of America. It had to do with the Pope's crusade in Europe, as Eisenhower allegedly wrote that book, because Eisenhower was the lead crusader for the Pope, overseen by Francis Spellman. And that's the way it is for all of our wars. Since 1933, this military government, every war that this military government has waged has been for the benefit of the Pope and for the destruction of historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. Not for our benefit at all.
Okay, so I realize we're running a little bit short on time. There are a couple other points I'd wanted to mention if we could.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perhaps we can be on later on the week. I was thinking Friday if you're available, but perhaps we can discuss that off the air. So, as you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, we normally get together once a week, and except for if you're out of town doing a class or a conference or something, and I realize we not streamed in several weeks. So there are a number of big events that took place while you're out of town. One was on the 28th of last month. Actor Matthew Perry died. Now, I didn't really follow his career. He's probably best known for the TV series Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004. And I bring him up for a couple of reasons. Matthew Langford Perry lived from the 19th of August until October the 28th. So he was 54 years old. And he posted on one of his social media accounts that he was fully boosted. Now, I'm not sure that had a hand in his demise. Who knows? He is found in his hot tub, I guess, in Los Angeles. Now, I bring up this Matthew Perry for a couple of reasons. One, his mother, Suzanne, who is Canadian, she was the press secretary for Pierre Trudeau back in the 1970s. So
Just Pierre Trudeau.
Yes. So do I need to go into
help to ruin Canada, bringing in blacks and Sikhs and East Indians to further destroy the white population of Canada, pursuant to the design of the Jesuits in destroying historically white Protestant peoples?
Okay. Yes. Now, according to Kathy, sorry, I'm dealing with hay fever or something, but according to Kathy O'Brien, she said she had an encounter with Pierre Trudeau, back in the 1960s. So she was born in 1957. So she would have been, I guess, a preteen. And so this is before Pierre Trudeau became prominent. There's, in, I believe, Michigan, Mackinac Island, they have basically their version of the Bohemian Grove, which is.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, she mentions that in her book. The book is Trance, Formation of America, and she mentions Trudeau in that book. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess because it's closer to the border, you had much more easier access to Canadian politicians or future Canadian politicians, such as the aforementioned Pierre Trudeau. Also, she mentions Brian Mulroney, who is a.
She does.
Okay, so
Irish Catholic. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so both Trudeau and Mulroney are Catholic, both of whom were trained by Jesuits.
Yep.
And as a matter of fact, according to Kathy, Pierre Trudeau was actually a full-on priest.
Yes, I remember she said that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that seems rather odd. Now, the current Prime Minister of Canada is Justin Trudeau. Now, there's all sorts of speculation as to who his actual birth father was. Was it actually Pierre or was it Fidel Castro?
It was Fidel. Fidel was fiddling with his wife, and out comes Justin. He looks just like him. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
That is Catholic morality. Adultery, fornication everywhere.
Okay, so I have no proof of it, but is it possible Pierre Trudeau was Matthew Perry's father?
It wouldn't surprise us, George.
Oh,
I mean, it's not out of the question.
okay.
These
So
people are serial fornicators, serial adulterers. That's why when Stanley Kubrick made that movie Eyes Wide Shut, it shows him in there with one of their serial adultery parties that Tom Cruise is a part of, and he's watching it. You can't see the actual fornication, but you get the idea. And then the offspring of all these parties, they put them in political power.
so they make them president or prime minister or whatever.
Yep.
Okay, so you had to, so I mentioned Matthew Perry, the late Matthew Perry, the actor. And so why do I throw that a positive? Well, not to be confused with Commodore Matthew Perry.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and what did he do, George?
well, just for clarification, Matthew Kelbreth Perry lived from the 10th of April, 1794, died on March the 4th, 1858. His cause célèbre was he basically reopened Japan. Now,
right after the Japanese emperor kicked all the whites out of Japan, the Catholic whites, and then later he kicked out the English when Charles II took a Catholic wife. Then the emperor or the shogun kicked out the English, and the only ones allowed to live in Japan were the historic Dutch Protestants, and they had the island of Nagasaki. That's right. So Japan was on to the Catholic threat to their shogun and to their emperor. And Matthew Perry opened up Japan after the England and America and all the other white Catholic and Protestant nations have been expelled since about 1615, something like that. So for over 200 years, they were not allowed to come into Japan. Thank God and glory, hallelujah. Japan had peace, it prospered. Yeah, until filthy Commodore Matthew Perry opens up Japan for the Jesuits under the Buchanan administration in 1853, 1854. And that's the beginning of the end for Japan.
Well, okay, so now I need to provide some of the receipts. Now, you said you're talking about how the Jesuits uses this other Matthew Perry to open up Japan. Now, Commodore Matthew C. Perry was a known Freemason.
Sure, just like Buchanan. You have the whole Masonic Lodge busy serving the Jesuits.
So, why do I bring up something that took place? Well, this took place back in 1854, so almost 170 years ago. So why do I bring up something that took place back in the mid-19th century? Well, the Jesuits were setting up the chess pieces for their future war in the Far East.
Correct. That's why they would have the Spanish-American War, and during that war, they would seize Philippines, Guam, and those islands in the Pacific in preparation for World War II, ultimately.
Yes. So, as we were discussed, I guess a couple of months ago, the original capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii was in Lahaina, which basically got destroyed a few months ago. And just as a quick refresher, I know back on the January the 17th, 1893, basically the Committee of 13 overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii. And now the Committee of 13 was definitely Masonic. So this is an 18.
Committee of 13 that what's his name? John Coleman talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. He talks about the Committee of 300, but I think he also mentions the Illuminati 13. There's 13 families there.
Okay, so it's interesting because nowadays, if you mention Matthew Perry, almost all people will think of the actor, the TV show Friends, and he did a few other things, but that is part of the psychological operation. Oh, you mean there was another Matthew Perry, the Commodore Matthew Perry?
Yeah, because I never was taught history in these American school systems, and I don't know anything. And so there's really somebody else called Matthew Perry? Yeah, it's tremendously sad. especially when they don't get the Jesuit connection to Matthew Perry, and then also to the Emperor, the boy Emperor that they made. I mean, Tom Cruise has a movie called The Last Samurai. It shows the boy Emperor. He would be Emperor for 40 years. And his name was, what was his name? Emperor. Anyway, Emperor for 40 years. They made him a knight of the British Empire. Yep. Meiji, Emperor Meiji. They made him a knight of the British Empire. And he did exactly the British bidding in the building of the Japanese Empire in preparation for Second 30 Years' War. Hey, we got to go, brother. I cover all this in my book, Vatican Assassins. You need to get my book. So you can go to 24/7 World Radio and pick it up. It's an ebook. I'll reprint it one of these days. But George, if you want to finish off with a few comments, and then we'll close.
Okay, so hopefully we can be on again later on this week to make up for the absence of a couple of weeks, because there are several other things I need to mention. I wanted to talk about what just happened in Maine a couple weeks ago, but as I said, owing to time constraints, I won't be able to do that. So shall I just give my contact information?
Please do, George. Please.
Okay, so if people have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, please email me at georgewidger1969@gmail.com. That's GEORWIDGER1969@gmail.com. I'll do the best I can to respond to you if you have any specific questions. If you want to share something with me, an article, video, whatever, or let me go over topic or go over topic again, please make your request. Also, if you send me an email, please give me like 24 hours to respond. If I don't, sorry, just send me another one. I'm a one-man show here.
Yes, you are. Yeah, okay. Well, George, thank you for being on with us. Thank you for that contact information. As Brother Richard. Thank you for tuning in today. And may the Lord bless you as you do his will. You can send me money by Zelle if you wish. Just Eric John Phelps, EricJohnPhelps. And the number is 484-238-5200. Dearly appreciated. And or you can send a check to P.O. Box 306, Newmanstown, Pennsylvania, 17073. Appreciate your gifts, and you're helping us to be on the radio to give you this information proving the Jesuits run everything through their Masonic lodges and their other secret societies. And it's Brother George who brings out all these wonderful little details validating that. So, all right, until next maybe Friday in the evening, because I got a class till 5 o'clock. Until we meet again, Lord bless you, and Maranatha.